Support for Trifles comes from listeners like you, who support us through Patreon and Substack. Bonus material, thank you gifts, and more await at patreon.com/trifles and at trifles.substack.com. And now you can enjoy some Trifles swag, mugs, notepads, and oval stickers, available in our store. Find it at ihearofsherlock.com/merchandise.
Welcome to Trifles, a weekly podcast about the Sherlock Holmes stories.
It is, of course, a trifle, but there is nothing so important as trifles.
Yes, Gables, Garridebs, and students all came in 3-packs, but there are so many other details to pick apart in the stories.
Pray, be precise as to details.
You know the plots, but what about the minutiae? What's the difference between a gamekeeper and a gatekeeper? Between a Tregennis and a Tregallis? Between a Jack in office and a Mr. Cocksure?
You are very inquisitive, Mr. Holmes.
It is my business to know what other people don't know.
Scott Monty and Bert Wolder will have the answers to these questions and more in Trifles.
The game's afoot.
Episode 473, Oxford or Cambridge? Hello and welcome to Trifles, the Sherlock Holmes podcast where we get into the details in the Sherlock Holmes stories. I'm Scott Monty.
I'm Bert Wolder.
Bert, you seem like an Oxford kind of guy to me. It's because of your shoes, isn't it?
Oxford's not brogues. That's all I remember from, what was the name of that movie? The one that featured a Savile Row tailor as the sort of the entryway for the British Secret Service.
I don't
Oxford's
know
not
that
brogues. Yeah, that was sort of a code phrase, meaning that when you get your boots, they should not be in the brogue style, but rather in the more sophisticated Oxford style.
Oh.
So, there you are.
Is that, No, I don't know that movie. I was going to say Kingsman.
It's a fairly recent picture. Maybe I had Colin Firth in it. It was, one of these sort of super secret agent movies.
Superb. Well, it's one to put on the list once I can figure out which one it is.
Well, I'm sure in 5 or 6 years I'll remember it. So I'll remember
is it
the
Kingsman,
title.
The Secret Service?
That's it.
Okay, there you go.
Oxford's not brogue.
Oxford's not bros. Fantastic. Just not that this has to do anything with our subject today, but I'll put a link into the show notes about Oxford's not brogues.
Good.
just to keep people going down this rabbit hole. No, we are not talking about shoes, not even shirtwear. We are talking about which university Sherlock Holmes may have attended, and it is inspired by Gavin Brand in his chapter from My Dear Holmes, a book first published in 1951. It's part of our Sherlock Holmes a Theorist series of episodes, where we take a piece of Sherlockian scholarship and go through it with you to help you understand what the scholar was talking about, and maybe to add in our own commentary along the way. It's going to be a great discussion today. We'd also remind you that if you'd like to help support the show, to help us find great sources like this, you can do that by going to Patreon or Substack. It's as simple as trifles.substack.com or patreon.com/trifles. You can support us for as little as $1 a month, and in return, you get to listen to the shows ad-free. We have some thank you gifts for our patrons over on Patreon, and you occasionally get bonus material like Trifling Trifles, the episodes where we take only about 5 minutes or so to talk about a smaller issue. So take note, decide which is right for you, and thank you in advance. Well, Sherlock Holmes's college education is something that has been long debated by Sherlockians, and there are a number of other ones we could talk about, and we may, perhaps, in the future, but today we'd like to talk about Gavin Brenn's version in Chapter 2 of My Dear Holmes. So, Bert,
Yes.
start us out.
Well, Gavin Brenn, for our listeners' sake, you must know he served as chairman of the Sherlock Holmes Society of London. And this book from the 1950s, My Dear Holmes, was a major addition to Sherlockiana. And I believe we've talked, did we not talk about his essay on the blue carbuncle?
Yes, that was from his other book, 17 Steps to 221B.
Right.
And that was back in season 6, I believe.
Oh, well remembered. And that was a wonderful paper in which he walked all the 5 boroughs mentioned in the case of the blue carbuncle.
Yes, episode 310, in case you're looking for that one.
And Brenn was a leading member of the Dickens Fellowship and the Johnson Society. So this is a first water scholar here. And he starts us out with this question in this essay with one of the most unusual, I think, starting sentences that I've ever encountered, at least to me, in the Sherlockian literature. On the page, he begins by saying, probably, Holmes was not sorry when the time came for him to go to university. Now, when you write these things, the whole idea here is to have an entryway for the reader. And we will never come back to this question of whether or not Holmes was sorry about going to university. And Gavin Brenn then says, in all events, we are not sorry because now we have the question, which university? Okay, fine.
There you go.
And the minor ones can be ruled out at once. And he kicks us off with the Glorious Scot. And the Glorious Scot contains one of Holmes's very, very few references to his university days. And brief as it is, says Gavin Brenn, we can rule out these minor universities. The reference in Gloria Scott, and we'll come back to that, clearly points to either Oxford or Cambridge. So it must be one of them. But which? And then Brenn takes us right into the literature. And throughout this whole essay, he'll be sort of revisiting some of these points and knocking them down one by one to get to his conclusion. Ronald Knox says Christchurch, Oxford. Dorothy Sayers said Sydney, Sussex, Cambridge. And T.S. Blakeney also said Cambridge, but does not nominate any particular college. So there we are. We've laid the groundwork for this exploration.
Yeah, and if we look to the canon itself, as far as the college is concerned, and just for folks, if you're not familiar with college versus university, the university is the larger institution, which is made up of a number of colleges. And those colleges are could be perhaps living quarters, could be perhaps particular curricula that are held throughout, but that's how the hierarchy works here. And Brenn says, so far as the college is concerned, there seems to be no real evidence available. And, of course, in the Three Students, we think that he was at St. Luke's, but this doesn't help because that's not a real college. So, in attempting to solve the Oxford v. Cambridge problem, we have to consider 5 separate cases where we hear about university affairs with regard to Sherlock Holmes. And these 5 fall into 3 distinct categories. Group 1 is the Gloria Scott and the Musgrave Ritual. Group 2 is the Missing Three-Quarter. It's not much of a group. It's just one story. And then Group 3, the Three Students and the Creeping Man. Okay, and that first group is, this is, we know we're at Holmes's university, but we don't know whether it's Oxford or Cambridge. The second one, the Missing Three-Quarter, we know that we're at Cambridge, but we don't know whether this is, in fact, Holmes's university. And then in the third group, we don't have information either way. So there you have it. There's a lot of confusion out there, but there are 5 stories that bring us within the halls of the Academy.
Yes, and then Bren says all of the research up until now has been on this first group, the Gloria Scott and the Musgrave Ritual. And it's, the second group, the missing three-quarter, is surely a good place to look. And this last group, the three students and the creeping man, that's been completely overlooked. So let's see, what we can find out. Well, so he's narrowed the field here a little bit. And he tells us, in other words, we know that in the missing three-quarter, we are at Cambridge. So where is the evidence that Holmes has ever been there before? Let's begin with that. In the first place, when they're traveling to Cambridge, he does not know that there's a late train from London to Cambridge.
Yeah, one would think that if he had been to Cambridge, he would know the train schedule.
Yeah.
Or at least be modestly familiar with it.
Yeah, and because Holmes in his own college days was residing in London, and we get that from the Gloria Scott. So one would have thought, therefore, that if his university was Cambridge, he would know, generally the time of the last train. Well, okay, maybe that particular train was not in existence in Holmes's time and put on in some later date. But forgetting about that, after their inquiries in London, Holmes and Watson travel up to Cambridge, and though they are clearly in a train which is much earlier than 11:15 p.m., it's dark by the time they get there. So on arrival, they immediately interview Dr. Leslie Armstrong, who's suspected of being involved in Godfrey Staunton's disappearance. So right away, they have to find rooms for the night. And Holmes says, "Now, my poor Watson, here we are, stranded and friendless in this inhospitable town, which we cannot leave without abandoning our case."
Yeah, I think that, to me, that has always secured the deal. That if Holmes was returning to his alma mater, despite whatever kind of experience he might have had there, he wouldn't have called it an inhospitable town and a friendless place. He surely would have had a couple of connections there, even if they were on the faculty. And inhospitable, he would know where to find a room. He would know immediately where the public houses were or the inns, etc. So that's a big red flag. And Bren says, doesn't this read like a disparagement of Cambridge by an Oxonian? Okay, of course, Holmes isn't a typical representative of his university, but that he was an aloof and reserved sort of fellow and went his own way, well, of course, that's expected. And you might expect him to have a jaundiced view of the town. But he would say, this inhospitable town, which even in my own day I always disliked intensely, or another kind of phrase. So with no further addition there, it reads like a remark of a man who's visiting the town for the first time.
And then what happens in the case is we have Dr. Leslie Armstrong, and Holmes is almost immediately the next day on a bicycle because he sees the doctor's carriage emerging. And off he goes, leaving Watson at the inn. But Holmes is detected by the doctor, who stops and calls his bluff. And when he gets back to the inn, Watson says, well, perhaps we should begin following Dr. Armstrong the next day. And then Holmes says, it's not so easy as you seem to think. You are not familiar with Cambridgeshire scenery. It doesn't lend itself to concealment. All the country I passed over tonight is as flat and clean as the palm of your hand. But if he knew about it, why would he have undertaken a pursuit which would fail? Well, it seems as if he's never been in Cambridge and that he's in ignorance about the peculiarities of the Cambridge scenery. And now we see the significance of Watson's remark that it was after dark when they arrived in Cambridge, because they had arrived in daylight, Holmes would have seen the difficulties from the window of his train.
Oh.
Yeah. And so then, realizing that shadowing and following Armstrong is not going to be a practical proposition, Holmes devotes the next day to an enquiry in the pubs to the north of Cambridge, visiting without success Chesterton, Histon, Waterbeach, and Oakington. But that sequence and that travel is also very instructive to Gavin Brand.
Yeah, he says, note the order. For it's a rather peculiar one, and he's got a map here to show us the geography of Cambridge with respect to Chesterton, Histon, Oakington, and Waterbeach. And he says from Cambridge or from Chesterton, which is just slightly northeast of Cambridge, he says Histon lies to the northwest, and then Oakington is still further northwest, but then Waterbeach is to the northeast. So if he went back to Waterbeach after Histon, he'd probably come back again through Histon in order to get to Oakington. And this obvious route, he said, which anyone familiar with the neighborhood would take, would be Chesterton, Waterbeach, Histon, Oakington. And the route actually taken reveals the Oxonian in a hurry who hasn't had time to procure a map. But by the next day, we see that this has been remedied because he's heard of Trumpington, which is south of Cambridge. And that's where the draghound leads him, and where we eventually find that Godfrey Staunton is holed up. He says this should be the village of Trumpington to the right of us. Well, he couldn't have been at Cambridge without visiting a place so near. Right? He couldn't have attended Cambridge without visiting such a close by place. And should be, note, should be, the way Holmes said it, is the mark of an Oxonian. Again, suggesting a stranger, because Trumpington was a neighboring town.
Now, you remember a few moments ago we talked about what Brenda's done here to group these things, Group 1, Group 2, Group 3. First group is the Gloria Scott and the Musgrave Ritual. We've been doing all of this in Group 2, the missing three-quarter, and now we are into Bren's Group 3, which is the three students in the creeping man, which nobody has really written about. And I'd also like to point out that one of the nice things here about Bren's essay is he's just drawing things from the canon. You know, he may add this little map about where these villages happen to be, but they're mentioned in the canon. And, it's a lovely examination of Watson's writings here. So Bren says, in dealing with the three students, the first thing we have to prove is that it took place slightly earlier than the missing three-quarter. The three students we know is dated 1895, and the missing three-quarter, we're told, took place some 7 or 8 years before it was published in 1904. And Bren goes into these particular details in the calculation. After all, it's necessary. The case has to be later than 1893 because Holmes speaks of Armstrong as a man calculated to fill the gap left by the illustrious Moriarty. And so it took place, therefore, after his return from Tibet. And of course, so we've got the great hiatus here. And Bren goes into the details about that. But it's pretty good to establish the missing three-quarter is happening, in 1896, which is what most chronologists think, and the three students happening indeed earlier than that in 1895. So, says Bren, having established that the three students is the earlier of the two, we can now prove this case relates to Oxford. Now, at the start of the three students, Watson Holmes and Watson had been staying for some weeks in one of our great university towns while Holmes was studying early English charters. Well, during all that time, it's inconceivable Watson would remain in the town. If he were in Cambridge, he would be bound to know something about the surrounding countryside being as flat and clean as the palm of your hand. So clearly, therefore, the scene of the three students must be Oxford.
Yeah, and of course, Hilton Soames, the tutor and lecturer, the one that engages Holmes and Watson, is described as an acquaintance. Well, was he perhaps a survivor from Holmes's own undergraduate days? And like I mentioned before, having these acquaintances from his previous life at a university town. And at all events, Soames knows that he's in Oxford, and when it's discovered that the Fortescue Scholarship Examination paper has been read by an unauthorized person, he knows what to do about it. He contacts Holmes, and he says, "You're aware, Mr. Holmes, that our college doors are double, a green baize one within and a heavy oak one without." Well, why else would Holmes be aware of this unless he was a regular at St. Luke's? So by the time darkness has fallen and Holmes and Watson got through their investigations, he already knows there are only 4 stationers in town of any consequence, and he knows where each one is located. Well, again, that indicates that he's an Oxford man. And even more remarkable, Brand writes, is the demonstration of local knowledge that follows. Holmes and Watson are together right up until bedtime that day, and Watson's up at 8 o'clock the next morning, but Holmes has forestalled him 2 hours, during which he's been out and about, looking at the athletic grounds to collect some black clay. Well, how did he know his way there? Well, of course he does know where to go, because he had been, well, you could say he wasn't interested in athletics during his university career, but he probably knew the lay of the land, quite frankly. And we find frequently that Holmes does, in fact, know more than he admits. And if he were to state that he didn't know where the athletic grounds were, we should treat this with the same reserve as his famous statement that he didn't know or care whether the sun went around the earth or vice versa.
Well, then we come to the case of Professor Presbury and the creeping man, which adds very little to what we don't already know. Holmes proposes to enjoy what he describes as the amenities of this charming town. So it is clearly not the inhospitable town of the missing 3/4. And there's also a reference to driving past a row of ancient colleges, which, might be King's Parade of Trinity Street in Cambridge. But on the whole, it suggests Oxford. So far, wherever a university has been specifically mentioned, it is Cambridge, and wherever it has been left anonymous, on investigation, it turns out to be Oxford. As Holmes's own university comes in this latter category, one would anticipate that it too would prove to be Oxford. Then we get into this group 1 with the specifics, Gloria Scott and the Musgrave ritual. And this is where Bren does a lovely job of reviewing the literature from T.S. Blakeney and Dorothy Sayers and so on, and demolishing their propositions one by one.
Yeah, Blakeney said that Trevor from Gloria Scott was from Norfolk, so he would find it more convenient to send Trevor Jr. to Cambridge rather than Oxford. And he said, you set this against Ronald Knox's belief that the aristocratic Musgrave and the dog-eat tendencies of Trevor indicate all 3 were at Christ Church. And he said these 2 arguments may be left to cancel each other out. and then the incident of Dorothy Sayers' bull terrier, or to be more accurate, Victor Trevor's bull terrier. You remember Holmes was recounting to Watson that Trevor was his only friend that he made the 2 years that he was there. He was never very sociable, rather fond of moping in my rooms, working out my own little methods of thought. And he said, Trevor was the only man I knew, and that only through the accident of his bull terrier freezing onto my ankle one morning as I went down to chapel. Well, it's an open argument as to whether or not Holmes's college career was limited to 2 years, but we'll talk about that later. But what is clear is the incident of the dog must have occurred within 2 years of his arrival. And this is where Dorothy Sayers produces an ingenious theory in support of Cambridge. Dogs are not allowed inside the college gates at either university. Therefore, the incident must have happened out on the street. Now, Cambridge, at Cambridge, undergraduates spend their 2 years in rooms, moving into college thereafter. At Oxford, the reverse is the case. This incident happened in the first 2 years, therefore it must have happened at Cambridge. But, glaring omission here, this assumes that rules are always obeyed. Now, is this the picture you have of Oxford or Cambridge? Couldn't the dog have been smuggled into the college, maybe for a practical joke? But from the standpoint of the dog, couldn't the event happen both outside and inside the college? I could have been frightened or hurt out in the street and ran through the gate and fastened onto the unfortunate Holmes. What could be simpler?
Finally, there remains an argument which had been put forward on behalf of Cambridge, which is of a general character. And the idea there is that with his bent for science, Cambridge would have been the better choice. Well, there might be some force in this argument if Holmes's interests were confined to science. But in point of fact, Holmes has an extensive knowledge of literature, history, philosophy, art, music. He spoke at least 3 foreign languages and was a complete walking encyclopedia. Moreover, it seems probable that his scientific knowledge was not acquired at university, since we find him at a later date studying at Bart's. So to sum up, therefore, we think that while the bull terrier makes a valiant effort on behalf of Cambridge, in the last analysis, the verdict must be given to Oxford.
That's well done. That's really well done. And what was interesting, too, is at the time, Brend had so little to work with in terms of other Sherlockian scholarship. You know, Knox and Blakeney and Sayers. And that was it. And as you said before, he worked within the confines of the canon and with facts that were easily observable. And just really made a nice case for Oxford, I thought. Yeah, me too. Yeah, our friend, the late Nick Utekin, would be very pleased. Because Nick, who was an Oxford resident for most of his life, if not all of his life, devoted a good deal of time to supporting the idea that Holmes indeed went to Oxford. He even wrote a small monograph on the subject, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, the controversy.
Well, Oxford, Cambridge, what are your thoughts, dear listeners? Or perhaps Holmes simply went to Oxbridge. Or was it Camford? I forget. Yeah. Either way, it's just a trifle.
It is, of course, a trifle, but there is nothing so important as trifles.
Please join us again next week for another installment of Trifles. Show notes are available on SherlockHolmesPodcast.com. Please subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts and be sure to check out our longer show, I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, where we interview notable Sherlockians and share news of the Sherlockian world.
You've taken my breath away, Mr. Holmes.
And Reginald Musgrave.
Well, he's a scion of one of the oldest families in England.
He's in the same college as myself.
He was not generally popular among the undergraduates, but it always seemed to me that what was set down as pride was really a cover for extreme natural diffidence.